Welcome to the fifth edition of Next is Now, a future of farming podcast. I'm your host, Brian Brunson with GFL Ag, and my co-host, Dan Aberhart from Aberhart Ag Solutions.
Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Brian, what we do now has such a big impact on what happens next for the future of farming, and that is why on this show we say, Next is Now, Next is Now.
Oh, we're cutting that out and we're adding a jingle to that bad boy. We're going to
Next time I bring in my keyboard or accordion.
Well, like Dan said, we'll continue to discuss and debate topics that make a difference to farmers' operations now. I'll be asking a lot of questions because I don't really know the nuts and bolts of farming, and it's my job at GFL to try and understand what's happening in the world of agriculture and help you guys and gals produce better, hopefully with our solutions.
You're doing a tremendous job as always, Brian. It's my job to bring you the facts, nothing but the facts, and chat about things in a way that satisfies your curiosity as something of an outsider and a newcomer to agriculture.
Well, today, Dan and I are curious about the topic of harvest optimization. What's going to be on the show today, Dan?
Oh, man, so much good content. I really enjoyed putting this all together for you, Brian, and for the folks that are listening and watching. Our feature expert interview is with none other than Marcel Kringe, who's a resident of Brandon, Manitoba as well, founder and CEO of Bushel Plus. I spoke to him at length at Ag in Motion, so I have a bunch of great clips. On Coffee Row, I spoke with Donald Hollett from Aberhart Farms in Langeburg, Saskatchewan. Christine Jones with C&E Farms in Wadena, Saskatchewan. And a good friend of mine, Trevor Millsap from Redicop Industries. And some of the things that we're going to bring to you today on the show is how a combine works. Which combine is the best in the combine wars? Pre-harvest prep. Tips to make your combine hum. ROI on calibration, it's absolutely incredible. How to handle volunteers, how to manage crop residue, and little tips and tricks on how Aberhart Farms saved $200,000 last year calibrating your combine. And I'm telling you, folks, if you save $200,000 calibrating your combine by virtue of watching this or listening to this podcast, please send Brian Brunson a per diem. He could use it, I'm sure.
You knew where I was going with that last last bullet point. Why have I been buying drinks and dinners?
Yes.
What's up with that?
Well, it's all related to scope, but it's a very real thing, and we'll get into why that makes such a difference for producers. And hopefully there's a lot of things that make folks think about things. So here we are. It's Harvest 2023. Let's get ready to rumble.
Well, as usual, sounds like an extremely packed show full of very useful information. So if you're passionate about agriculture and you want to stay ahead of the curve, then tune in to Next is Now and get ready for some thought-provoking discussion, unbiased opinions, and a deep dive into the future of farming. All right. Danny boy, combine. For all these gearheads out there, and I sometimes consider myself a gearhead, this is an exciting subject. I'm sure I'll have a question here or there about it, but give us some background on the term combine.
Well, hey, I bet you loved playing with Tonka toys as a boy, hey?
Oh, yeah.
This is Tonka toys times 10 or perhaps 100 or perhaps 1,000 or perhaps 1,000,000 when you look at the new X9 combines from John Deere, which are the staple in the industry. Although some folks have Lexians, and I must say that Aberharts have actually switched, much to my father's chagrin. But he's still driving the combine, so he must have lived with it. But did you know, Brian, and for the audience listening, that the combine is short for combine harvester? And do you have any idea the origins of the word combine?
I would imagine it's some Latin thing about combining machines with manpower or something. I don't know.
I don't think the Latins had combines.
Sure, they did.
So, but it's actually because it combines three different operations. Okay, technically we're talking reaping, so this is a process of cutting and gathering the crops. Threshing, separating the edible part of the grain or the crop from the chaff, which is inedible. And winnowing, this process removes the chaff from the grain, often used by wind or forced current of air. So, used to be done by hand. Now it's all done by these magical machines in the field that are doing technically three operations at once. Did you know that?
Wow. I'd imagine technology plays a big role in combines and harvesting.
it's also probably as much as you as a human being can do is three things at once. We always talk about like you can hold 3 bowling balls, but you can't hold any more, Brian. It's just a life tip there.
I can probably squeeze a 4th one in there. I don't know, man. We'll have to test that out one day.
Okay, you get back to me when you're big Lebowskiing with your boys.
Absolutely. I already got my bowling shirt on, so I'm ready.
It's really interesting because growing up on the farm in Saskatchewan, I have a lot of perspective on all the different stages of the evolution of combines. So I know for a fact that the pioneers that came to our country physically cut the crop with their hands, with hand tools, if you can imagine that, which is really crazy. But the threshers that we use, the stationary machines with big steel wheels in the field that crews of men and women would pull into the field, they'd hand feed the grain into these threshers. And we still have one of these threshers at the farm, Brian. It's right at the fork in the road to go to the yard. I used to play in there. It was kind of tough to get onto the wooden slats inside of this machine, but it was a great fort. And I may have kissed a girl or two there as well. It's kind of a romantic spot on the hill on the creek. And, I never did see it in action, though. I know I've talked to older folks and drank draft beer with them and reminisced about the days that they would work all day in the heat, physically shovel the grain into these machines, and the chaff is flying. That's pretty cool to think about. All that going way back.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that, and this might be a little bit of an aside, but you mentioned playing in what is essentially a very dangerous piece of machine, farm machinery. And you think about how we parent kids today where, we literally stand over top of them with everything they do.
Look at me. This is how I got to where I am today.
Exactly.
Foundational, playtime, and romantic time. But anyways, that's a very interesting part of our history. And then we had pull type combines. And I remember specifically a John Deere 4420 and a 7721 pull type combine that I ran. I think my dad left. I have a very distinct memory of my dad leaving me alone with this fantastic machine. But I remember this yellow handle on the dash that engaged the power takeoff, the PTO, which is a spinning apparatus that drives all the parts in the combine. And, you'd start it up and it's kind of this giant, like the thing would take off, right? And everything, you're sitting there and everything's going. And then I remember vividly plugging the combine and pushing this yellow thing ahead, and it wouldn't go. And then, obviously, Father was a little bit upset that I was trying to force everything through when it was plugged. And that's why they won't let me drive the $1 million combines anymore.
You've been banned.
I have been. It's more than wages when I come home. It's the damage that you have to expense in. And how do you budget for that in your yearly forecast on the farm?
Do we let Dan touch this or not? We got to put that in the forecast, in the budget.
Yeah, it's $300 in wages and $5,000 to $10,000 in damage if I was to come out for the weekend. So
it's already been calculated.
Well, and so now we have a fleet of equipment with incredible technology on it, and we have teams of people with shifts and standard operating procedures, and it's absolutely incredible what these modern harvesters are capable of. And we're going to hear more about how these work with our feature interview. But is there any crazy questions that you have before we kind of get underway with that interview, Brian, that you need me to answer, given your burning curiosity and passion for life?
Well, yeah, there's only a couple this time. It's fairly straightforward what, the purpose of the combine is. But me, I'm a technophile, so I always look at what the implication of technology have on a lot of this stuff. So, with robotics, AI, how much has that impacted combine harvesting? Do you really even need anybody out there on the combine these days? What's going on in the technology?
Great question. We are still with operators in the combine, although that day may be coming. The part of the operation that's been automated here first is the actual grain cart. So part of the operation is we have big tractors with massive capacity grain carts with scales and GPS and everything that can be operated without an operator. So they will physically go to a combine underneath the auger. You have this unloading operation, and then they'll go to a resting place until the next one. Or if you get enough combines in place, you're going to be running 110% all of the time. And usually that's done by an operator. But that part has been optimized and automated. Oh, man, when you get into technology, I'm telling you, we have global positioning systems that are incredibly accurate. We have header height automation, so it cuts at the right height automatically. We know yield that's coming in. We know, quality and how dry the crop is. And there's actually a new company that's looking at recording all the quality of the grain and how good your sample is and everything like that, like grading. And a lot of the settings of the combine are now automated, although we'll talk about calibration. And all that data is being fed into systems that can, make yield maps and now disease maps and all kinds of crazy stuff. So it is super high tech, but I am telling you, back to the Tonka toys for boys and girls, of course. We still like to operate equipment. It's a lot of fun. So I think that's going to be the hardest part about automating it. And nobody really wants to sit at the edge of the field and just watch a screen. Being in that combine as it's performing a job, watching the completion of it, optimizing it, I think is one of the greatest rewards as a farmer and will always be a big deal.
That makes sense. And I can see people not really ever going away. Like you say, even if you're just pressing 3 buttons through the whole situation, you're in the combine, you kind of have a sense of control. You can sit in there and do your crossword and catch up on your reading. So I appreciate that part of it. I got one quick question, and this is my last question. You mentioned the grain cart. To me, in my mind, you say grain cart, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's the cart that the grain goes in once it's been harvested. Yeah. Why does that even need to have any type of technology? It seems like you just have a cart that follows behind and catches everything, but it sounds like there's a little bit more to it than that.
You know what's really interesting in all these machines, whether it's a sprayer, combine, seeder, if you don't have the proper supporting logistics and infrastructure to get that product to the machine or get that product away from the machine, you've got a huge bottleneck, and you've got $1 million piece of equipment that's not performing up to standards, that you're not getting the most productivity out of, that you've essentially blew a bunch of money on, and it can hold you up. I mean, seeding these days is like 2 weeks. Harvest is like a month. It's wild. It's super compressed times because seeding goes so fast. All the crop comes in at the same time. All these operations have to be optimized. So the grain cart is the key part of taking the grain away from the combines in a timely fashion in order to get the grain to whatever storage. And if you go to a modern day trade show, Brian, you look around, there's actually a really big unit that's almost a cross between a grain cart and a bin in the field. It's so big because at some point the wheels actually come up and it's not trying to get through the field because it'd be way too much compaction, so you can load it so much more. It's like a mobile bin. So you can store and offload the grain to that and then bring semis to the field to get all the grain away from that to get to the bin storage. We're talking about all kinds of systems and capabilities to get grain away. And one thing that we haven't touched on that is of interest now that I think about it, but I know the family farms just invested heavily in a grain dryer. So that's almost like another combine. I should have pursued that actually, because they just built multi-million-dollar grain handling and drying facility. But the ability to take the grain off in a wetter condition with more moisture in it and dry it down, especially in years where the harvest gets late, means dollars, means grade, means efficiency. You might avoid frost, which is killing. You might avoid degrading of the crop status because it's out in the elements. So the sooner in Canada, because of a really short season, which I know you guys can't relate to in Texas or Brazil, but in Canada, it's all important to get the crop off as soon as humanly possible.
Right. Okay. Does
that make sense?
It does. I didn't know there was a big issue about the drying of the grain, but now that you said it makes sense. Getting everything. You don't want, because mold and all kind of stuff can happen, I'd imagine.
Yeah, we don't want you getting mycotoxins in your Cheerios, buddy.
Yeah. I think I appreciate that.
We're thinking of you. We are thinking of you. So, hey, I had a really interesting conversation at Ag in Motion here recently. It's a long weekend here in Canada, by the way, and lots of folks have started harvesting. So that's of interest. But we talked to Marcel Kringe of Bushel Plus founder and CEO at Ag in Motion, and he just illuminated a whole bunch of really cool stuff. So I wanted to share a bunch of clips with you, Brian, and have a conversation about that. So I think where we should start is I wanted Marcel. I was thinking of you, brother. I was thinking of you at the show when I was talking to Marcel, and I wanted him to explain the basics of how a combine works. So let's touch on that video first.
We got the combine, we got the header. The header is basically there to cut the crop as it's going through the field. Let's talk cereals, okay? Let's talk wheat. Yeah. So there's a knife system on the bottom of the header that cuts the crop, and there's a reel on the top that helps just a little bit to bring that crop head forwards into the header. There's either auger or side drapers that bring that cut off crop towards the middle of the machine, where that is super important that it gets in properly. And then there is as you can see in the background there's something called a feeder house. There's a chain in there that brings it, in simple terms, from the header into the machine. And then there's a couple of different machines out there. We have single rotor machines, twin rotor machines. We have hybrid machines that have a thrashing drum in the front. But to keep this simple is the combine is somewhere inside thrashing the grain, which means it's separating the kernels out of the heads or the kernels out of the canola pods. That means we have to have some harder thrashing going on, but the better we can set it there to actually get a lot of grain on grain thrashing, the easier it is to separate here. The grain is supposed to fall through the concave, so 80 to 90% of the grain we want to get out of the concaves in the very front, and that falls towards the grain pan, a pre-sieve, and a top sieve. And the rest is hopefully only long straw that goes through the rotor or over the walkers, out the back of the machine. It's going through the chopper and getting spread. But the rest is going on the sieves. And the sieves, the movement helps to get all that stuff back to the back of the machine, out of the machine. And the wind helps to separate the grain from the chaff and some of the short straw. And best case scenario, the grain falls through the sieves, and gets into the clean grain tank elevator into the tank. And there's another 5 minutes we have to talk about the return on the tailings.
All right.
What I want you to do, Brian, is go home, buy an X9 Combine 1/64 scale, and explain that to the boys. Okay? You need to educate these boys in the way of the harvester.
They'd glaze over as soon as I said appreciative and a top sieve? What? No, I got lost there.
Sieve.
A top sieve. I got the feeling that when you use these machines, you're getting probably a percentage of the actual grain through, and you're probably losing some stuff just because that's just going to happen with a machine. What is that percentage? I mean, are you getting 90%, 95% of what goes through, or is that per machine?
It's like you're reading my mind.
We've been together for a while.
We've been together. This is the foundation of a great relationship, Brian. When you read my mind.
Exactly.
I expect that. How much loss? It's visceral, my friend. It's visceral. Let's hear from Marcel on what kind of losses we can experience if we don't get our shit together.
It's unfortunate that a lot of combines are not dialed in to spec.
Right.
And it's not always to blame on the user or the driver. It can also be parts inside the machine, things are not set up right properly, that they thought they're set up properly.
Yeah.
So what we see out in the field, the goal is to be about a bushel and less on loss.
Wow.
But in reality, but now comes the reality, we're seeing 3 to 5 bushel in average out when we start measuring and putting actually the proper numbers to it.
Perfect.
And that's a tough one, right? That's a lot of money, and even more. So basically 2 to 10% in loss out there.
We're going to talk more about this,
Okay.
and maybe that doesn't mean a lot to you, but we'll know the numbers by the end of the episode, so stick around. It's big
I'm
money.
a percentages guy. 10% is a lot money-wise in my mind.
Yeah. Well, how about a couple $100,000?
Like 200 grand?
Like 200.
It's a lot of bread, pun intended.
Well, let's talk about what you can do before you hit the field, right? I mean, Formula One, or for some that prefer NASCAR, which I can't really relate to, but hey, good on you. God bless you. There's a lot that goes into getting that car on the track before you hit the track. So let's talk about that with Marcel.
there's a lot of things pre-harvest that people can do that they forget about. We always think like, oh yeah, we set the combine in the field. But there is 60% of the stuff that we teach in our combine clinics and our educational lessons actually pre-harvest setup. So there's a lot of things we can calibrate and set up to spec before we even get into the field that gets forgotten a lot, even when they went through an inspection. Mm-hmm. So I really, I stress that in a positive way to say you need to make sure you know your machine the way it has to work.
These folks do a lot of pre-harvest clinics, education, setup. And of course, there's something called a pre-delivery inspection, PDI, when the machine comes from the factory and they're supposed to set it up as good as they possibly can. And the dealership will come out and help you set it. But I think like with anything, there's a lot of finer points that if you take the time and get organized and be prepared, we're talking a couple of hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of bread.
I think you're right. And that can relate to pretty much any industry. I mean, you got to be prepared before you attempt whatever task you have ahead of you. I mean, we should probably apply that to how we do the show instead of just showing up and doing it. But I think it's,
we don't need pre-show calibration.
Nah, we don't need that.
Maybe a whiskey now and then. Okay, well, here's the thing. ROI. You got to know the return on investment. And I think this is very interesting stuff. And it's funny because what Marcel said, you might think, oh, Marcel's a bit of a salesman. He's selling all this stuff. But this was confirmed in some of our Coffee Row conversations, the exact numbers.
We have our Smart Drop app that not just helps you to do the calculations, it also puts it in perspective where there's a performance monitor in it. So it shows you not just your bushel per acre loss, but you add a couple more parameters in there, and it shows you dollars per acre loss, and the eye-opening number is dollars per hour grain loss. Mm-hmm. And we have consistently seen grain loss out to $800 to $1,400 an hour.
Wow.
Out of the back of one machine per hour. And that puts it in perspective, this number, because if we talk bushel, or percentages, it maybe doesn't sound that bad. But once you hear that dollar number and you go, we don't have time to drop a pen, or we don't have time to do this. But when you hear that it's $1,400 an hour,
unbelievable.
You have 10, 15 minutes to stop that machine, and you may not even have to stop it. You can do a lot of our tools can be used while you keep harvesting. But that's a lot of money that goes out the back. And if you bring this down, if you invest a couple of grand in the tools and realize you throw $1,400 an hour out the back, or let it even be $800, that's still too much money out the back. Look at canola. We seed canola at around 5 pounds an acre max. Mm-hmm. 1 bushel canola loss is 50 pounds an acre.
Wow.
But the average canola loss is a lot higher than that.
Yeah.
So we're putting more than 10 times the amount of our seeding rate back in the field. And that stuff, what does it happen? What happens?
Oh,
it regrows, volunteer. So we have to respray it, do more tillage. So all of a sudden, we have all this extra cost because we did that harvest loss thing. So if we put this all together, the investment into tools to dial in your combine properly, like a smart pen system, is all of a sudden minimal, and we're talking cents per acre is really what we're talking about. We even have farmers now that are pushing the combines harder and push more acres per hour, because now you have a tool that can prove what the machine is doing.
Yeah.
The running joke is always back in the day when we started driving faster, Grandpa is the first one to say, you can't drive that fast, you throw grain out the back, right? You can't do that. But how do you know that if you don't have a tool to check?
Yeah.
So now stuff becomes more efficient. The whole app that we have becomes more of actually the whole system is more a system to learn more about your machine and not just the drop pen. It's a lot more than that, and it's evolving, which is cool to see that it helps farmers.
That kind of rings home with me that back in my software sales days, and he's a little bit of a sales guy, but he knows his product, obviously, which is the key. That's what you want, somebody that knows what the hell they're talking about. And when I was selling software to hospitals and things like that, the software can do all these great things, electronic health records, and we can stay in touch with the patient. It increases positive outcomes in their level of care, just because you have continuity of records and all this. All that stuff was built in there, but it didn't work if you didn't set it up right on the front end.
Yeah.
And you get these guys like, oh, this doesn't work. It's like, well, did you do this? Did you have this? Oh no, we didn't do that part. Oh yeah, we didn't think we need to do that. I'm like, no, you have to set up properly to get the most out of your product, in this case, out of that combine. That makes complete sense to me.
It is so worth it. And there's 3 really big things there. Think about this. Number 1, what you are throwing out is pure profit. It's already there. So if you're making another $20 or $30 per acre because you're not throwing as much over, that could be 5 or 10% increase on your gross margin. It's already there.
That's huge.
Number 2, when you throw it over, it becomes an enemy. It becomes an enemy of the state. It becomes a terrorist organization. And especially some of these genetically modified crops that are not susceptible to things like Roundup, they are weeds. They are escapes. And you have to manage your rotation. You have to spray them. So they become the enemy as soon as they're thrown out the back and become weed seeds. And we'll talk about a solution for that, actually. It's very interesting here shortly. And the third thing is you've got $1 million combine in the field. You know, the question has come up recently, can you even have a $20 or $30 operator on there? You need a bloody astronaut, right? These tools are making your investment in your combine and your harvest operation way more productive. So you can go faster without these losses. So it's like, I hate to sell a whole bunch of Bushel Plus pans for Marcel. Maybe he'll buy me a draft here someday. But this is for real, man.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But the issue is, how do we slow down and how do we take the time? Because as soon as we get into the field, it's go time, let's go, boys. You know, nobody wants to take the time. But let's listen to Marcel talk about that, the psychology of taking time to calibrate.
As soon as the dust starts flying, we all switch the brains off, and then we just want to go. And I'm a farm kid myself. I get it. You know, the combine stands for 2 minutes, and in our hearts, it feels like 3 hours. Like, I get it. I'm a farm kid, right? However, there's so much money to be saved that some people have said they bought another combine from. Like, it's amazing what we can do there.
Okay. First question, is he really a farm kid? Do we know? There's a background check on that? He seems like a nice guy.
Yeah, he is. He's great. He's originally from Germany. And I want to have him on the podcast shortly because he's got an incredible story. And he's actually over in Australia doing a lot of work with his company. And he ended up in a really challenging accident and was stuck there for months in bed.
Oh, wow.
And had a huge recovery. But he's won Entrepreneur of the Year here in Brandon. He's very well known in the industry. He's expanding his product line. And honestly, he's just one of the most gentlemanly, humble people in the industry. I really appreciate and respect Marcel as a friend, and I know that I'm probably his best friend that he can come to with anything.
Yeah, that's
Marcel,
awesome,
if
man.
you're listening, I'm there for you, man. If you need help moving a couch or you need a friend to talk to,
I think he's angling for a free beer, but all right.
So how does his company help? Let's listen to Marcel illuminate us on such a topic.
How Bushel Plus started is to make lives easier and actually have a tool that can quantify the harvest loss of the combine. So we have our smart pen system right here that we can attach with 2 magnets to any combine, old, new, large, small, and we can remotely release a drop pen through an app or through a remote control that physically collects a sample from underneath the machine as the combine drives over it.
Yeah.
And we have a system that is an air separator call that cleans that sample in about 40 seconds. So you don't sit there with sieves for 10, 15 minutes to find those kernels. Again, efficient, fast. If it's not fast and easy, nobody wants to do it. And then that app comes with it that calculates the grain loss of that sample you just cleaned after it was on a scale.
Yeah.
And then we take that. Farmer can figure out their bushel per acre loss, can track those combine settings in the app if they like the loss. And then we walk them through with tips and tricks of how to calibrate the loss display in the cab. And we'll have to get on this after this pitch here, but that's a very important point that a lot of people are not doing. So then we know what we can do. We have tips and tricks in the app. We have customization specialists here that we do combine clinics and teach what to do in the machine. And then we also acquired actually Mad Concaves last fall, where now we have a concave system to not just make it easier and simpler to change a concave in less than 10 minutes for one person versus a couple hours with a couple of people. Those concaves also drastically reduce rotor loss and get rid of white caps. So now we have something to quantify what's going on and a tool to help you reduce it.
Beautiful.
But the knowledge is a big thing. It's like you can't do this without actually knowing how a combine works.
So here's a noob question. What's a drop pan? What's its purpose?
The drop pan catches what's being thrown over, and then you need to separate the chaff from the wheat, so to speak, literally in the case of cereals, and then you know what your losses are coming out of the combine. So it's attached underneath, it drops, it's literally a drop pan. Then everything that's getting thrown out the back end of the combine gets into there, and then they use math to figure out, are we good, are we bad, how much is that?
That's how they get that per hour number, using the drop pan.
Exactly. Very simple technology. We used to I remember Dad kneeling in the dirt, blowing the chaff away to see how much loss there was and just trying to calibrate it by eye. But it's kind of like ditching by eye. You might think you're really good, but when you really get into it, can you use a blade to make water run by your eye? And lots of old guys, of course, acquired the skill to physically make that happen. But using RTK, for example, for drainage would be the equivalent of using a drop pan for combining. The machines do it way better. I'm sorry, way better, and you save all kinds of time. So I hope that's been educational.
Absolutely.
So one last thing from Marcel. We want to talk about which combine is the best. I'm not going to reveal what he said.
Tonka.
Tonka.
Why didn't they ever get into this? Seems like they should have got into construction and farming. That would have been a great brand name.
We work with a lot of different colors, and here's my answer for that. It always depends on what's between the steering wheel and the seat.
That means you folks.
What kind of crops are you combining, and who's your closest dealer, or how far away are they? Those are the three things you got to ask yourself.
What a cop-out. I mean, what a politically correct answer.
Yeah.
Obviously, they've got that well honed, but
we can attach to any of them. So it's up to you, my friend.
Yeah.
Only you can make it happen.
Yeah, he's in an open relationship with all combines. All right, well, let's get right into Coffee Row, because there's a lot of great comments here that back up exactly what Marcel is talking about. And I'm telling you, our first Coffee Row is from a young lady who's very expert. There's actually 4 daughters on this particular farm. It's a seed farm up at Wadena, S1E05 Farms. Great friends of ours, big biocell users. But these girls are extremely competent, I'm telling you. And especially because they're seed farmers, they want a really clean sample, so they're really great at dialing in their combines. So let's hear from Christine.
Previous harvest, you do a good cleanup on everything, make sure that things are still working properly. Once harvest is done, we pull them into the shop. But now this time of year, it's going through and making sure that all of our settings and calibrations are still true to what they were last fall. So it's going through and ensuring, because we have a fleet of multiple combines, it's making sure that those shoe settings are still accurate, so that if you say that you need to set your top chaffer to 6 millimeters open, that across all the combines that 6 millimeters is 6 millimeters. So that one radio call means that it's the same adjustments across all of the units, so that we know that if that's what the grain sample looks like going into the tank on one of the combines, it's the same on the other combine as well. So it's checking the top shoe, the bottom sieve, and then making sure that our concaves are still, the settings for the concaves are accurate, and then making sure that everything is functioning and your limits are true to where they're supposed to be. So where we're starting is every farm has their set of magic numbers that they use. So we're starting with that, and then it's watching what our shoe and chaffer losses are off the monitors within the combine, as well as what our grain tank samples looking like. So you go out and you do your hands, you kind of get into an area where it's a respective, and you're looking at what your sample in the tank is looking like, making sure you don't have any split skins, too much chaff or debris going in that's going to dirty up the sample and end up with being dockage. It's going through and having somebody, whoever's in the grain cart, stopping and doing a check behind the combine to make sure that there's not too much going out the back, and then adjusting from there.
There you have it. Expertise in real time.
Yeah, that sounds like they got it all dialed in.
Well, and as a seed farm, it's especially important to be free of weed seeds and chaff in the sample, right? Because they're selling that seed for the next crop for neighbors and customers.
Right. Right.
So it's a whole different level. Now, when I talked to Donald Hollid from Aberhart Farms, I love a couple things that he said, and he really confirmed some of Marcel's numbers. But it sounds like they're pretty organized on the farm, and it's kind of inspiring, actually, to hear what Donald's got to say.
First off, the combines all go through the shop, make sure they're ready to go. Me and Adrian create a schedule for the guys, and then we have a planning meeting with the whole team, about roles, positions, hours, schedules, what each person's going to be doing, logistics for bins and stuff like that. Then we get who from the industry, like we have Claus come out and do a combine training clinic on the farm, or else we'll go to Claus. This year we're going to do a MacDon clinic and have everyone go to Claus and learn about the new headers. We're going to have MacDon come out for our planning day to do that. And then with the carts on that day, we'll have the carts all set up with the Libra cart, and we'll train everyone on the cart, make sure everything's working there, that everything's going to the basic stuff. The biggest thing is, Dan, is we have that planning day, right, for the whole team. We run them drop pans. So we have one combine with the cameras in it that we'll set for losses, and we'll run a drop pan like that Bushel Plus system. Yeah, and we'll run that, and we'll do the drop pan thing. And then we'll set the one combine to our results with the automation. And then as that combine adjusts itself, we will set the other combines based on what that one is saying. But we'll still run the drop pans or whatever, however it works on all of them, just to make sure we're not throwing over or anything like that. Last year, before the drop pan, we figured out we were throwing about 1.5 bushels an acre in the canola over until the drop pan. At $20, that's $30 an acre just in canola on 8,000 acres. So just running the drop pan and knowing what our losses, we probably saved $200,000 based off of digging in the dirt and looking versus what the drop pan was showing us. So there was a huge return on that. So it was pretty interesting.
That's pretty solid.
Mic drop.
The numbers don't
Ties
lie.
it all together. I mean, can you imagine? It's crazy.
I wonder after you get those numbers back, you're like, I could have been doing this for last 5 years. You're like, ugh.
Well, and it really makes you think about a wealthy barber kind of mindset, where what else can I calibrate in my world that's going to make a massive difference between the time I was 12 and when I retire at 94.
Yeah.
It adds up, right?
Is that your number, 94?
No, actually, no, it's not. I'm going to experience a life of continued growth, and my life expectancy is 189. My stretch goal is 240. So.
Oh, very nice.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need a whole show based on life extending technologies. What Dan is going to be using. Is this going to be your whole body at that age, or just your head because it's been frozen in cryogenics, and it's going to be an AI version of you? I may transfer
my brain to a jar at some point.
Okay, just check.
But the fun part is, dating half your age plus 7. I mean,
you use that. Okay, that's smart.
Formula. It's a formula.
I know that formula.
All right, well, we're not going to go down that rabbit trail, but just an interesting mathematical equation for everyone.
We are going to do a podcast on that for sure.
Okay, well, I had my good buddy from Redicop, Trevor Millsap, talk about incredible technology that actually manages the volunteers that are coming out the back. So I'll let him explain how their technology actually prevents any volunteers, like gets rid of pretty much all of the volunteers. And so it's really fascinating stuff, my friend. Let's hear this.
Yeah, so we originally had the MAV chopper, which basically just better spread, finer cut, just helped with residue management within the crop. And then it naturally evolved to the seed control unit for harvest weed seed control. What it does essentially is we're eliminating the throw over and reseeding of weeds within the crop. So basically, as your volunteer, say canola for that matter, or weeds go through the back end of the combine. They're going to go in a mill and basically get pulverized so they do not reseed themselves within the crop. Yeah, we had a presentation at Ag in Motion with Dr. Brianne Tideman, who spoke to all the herbicide-resistant weeds we're now seeing in Western Canada that we saw 5 years earlier in Australia, which is where we first took this product in 2018. What we're finding in Australia is a 97-98% kill rate on those weeds that go through the back end of the combine. And she had some very good insights on that. Your first year, your second year, you go through that big patch of kochia weed, for example, and you might not see that exact patch shrink in that first season. But what it's doing is you're not broadcasting that patch 50, 100 feet either way as you're going through that, right? So eventually the process is by year 4, year 5, you've eliminated reseeding of that weed to eliminate it from that crop.
Yeah, that seems essential.
It is so cool. And it touches on those other points. Throwing pure profit over the back, making an enemy of the state, being more productive. But this is a really big deal because what he means by herbicide-resistant weeds is we've got a lot of weeds that the more they survive when we spray them, the more Mother Nature adapts them to survive that spray. And the more chemical we have to use, and the more chemicals goes into your Cheerios and yada, yada, yada. Yeah. And we have certain chemicals that are so tough to kill, man. It's like trying to kill James Bond or something. Kochia. It's just... Oh, man, if you ever dealt with kochia or scentless chamomile. So if you can grind those weed seeds up and not be broadcasting them, it's a double, triple whammy for your happiness in life, which you said relates to money.
There is a correlation. People don't want to admit it, but...
Okay. Another show. Another show.
We'll save that one. Well, Danny boy, can you tell us what's going on closer to home in our community segment?
Well, something that I wanted to tell folks about, largely too, because basically in every community, a lot of communities across Western Canada, we have projects like this. But Aberhart Farms donated 140 acres of land. It's right around that new grain drying facility in the bin center there. The proceeds are going to be used for a new cancer care center in the town I was born in, Russell, Manitoba, right across the border. We're border people, just so you know. That's what explains a lot of our behavior. But the fundraising, the need for the new center is all about a bigger facility for chemotherapy and cancer treatment. This is a significant donation. We have a bunch of people in the community, from input suppliers and chemical fertilizer resources, people chipping in. And, those canola fields there this year really symbolize the resilience and growth of the home community, which is doing really well. And, it's all about positive change in community spirit. And that cancer center will be state-of-the-art, comprehensive services provided, accommodate more patients, more timely quality treatment. Everybody in their lives has somebody who's been touched by cancer. You know how important health is. Absolutely. So it's a real beacon of hope. And it's so amazing to see that community collaboration. A lot of folks talk about large farms and how communities are dying. I can't speak for everybody, but I'm really proud of Aberhart Farms and all the people that we employ and everything that they give back, and giving back to the community like this. And frankly, the town I grew up in when it was 1993, I left thinking, man, this sucker's going to die on the vine. But I'm telling you, it is thriving between the mine and the agriculture and tourism in the area with the ski hill and all of the great outdoor activities and the beauty. It's great. So it's really, really heartwarming to see.
No, that's wonderful. I didn't realize that, and I wish you guys a lot of luck with that. And let me know how I can help. Like you say, everybody knows somebody in their life that's been touched by some form of cancer, this is a very noble and worthwhile cause.
Well, and not just to highlight our contribution, there's so many projects like this across the prairies. It's pretty awesome. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it, man. Let's wrap this up with some key takeaways from what we've heard today.
Oh man, I hate to go back to it because people are really tired of hearing me talk about it, but it's the old 80-20 rule. You know, for 20% of the efforts, you'll get 80% of the return. And what you can do with calibration and pre-harvest setup and some of the new technology that's out there, and this harvest, weed seed killer. This is so many great things you can do today to capture that. And it's pure profit. And it's getting rid of the enemies of the state. And you can go faster and put more money in the kitty. I think it's a bit of a no-brainer. It was really fun to look into everything, and I love how all the conversations came together, and I hope that you're feeling, more educated right now.
Absolutely. That was a great show. And combines, again, we said it earlier, Tonka trucks. I'm always excited to hear about gear and how it works, and those are some really eye-opening facts with the money that can be saved. And great show overall, and I just want to thank everybody for listening. I hope you've enjoyed Next Is Now as much as I have. I'm Brian Brunson with Dan Aberhart, and join us next time on Next Is Now.